We are Living by the Word Ministries, a nonprofit organization dedicated to one cause. That cause is the truth given in the Holy Bible, which we believe is the inerrant and infallible Word of God, conferred to man to live by. We let the Word of God be the final authority as to what is or is not true. We strongly feel that if we do not expose false doctrine, we only encourage it. This ministry is designed to challenge you from an apologetic point of view. 1 Peter 3:15 instructs us to always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. This is Michael Tinsley. Please stay tuned while we arm you, the believer, to keep living by the Word. It's the noble thing to do.
Good evening and welcome to all of our listeners, wherever you may be, however you may be listening. Thank you for joining the Bible Information Brokers. My name is Brian Allen, and for the next 2 hours, we are not going to be taking your questions, maybe later on in the show, but we have a special guest here this evening, and we also have an important topic that we want to discuss with the listening audience, and I think it's a very, very important topic. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce one of the other members of the Bible Information Brokers. That's Professor Craig Hawkins. Craig, how are you doing?
Good evening, Brian.
How's it going, my friend?
Okay.
You ready for tonight's show?
Yeah.
Very good. I am too. And the listening audience out there, you guys are going to be you're going to be in for a great treat. Some great information is going to be shared with you, and it's important information, and it's something that affects everyone. It affects you as a Christian. It affects your kids. It affects just your everyday living. And we're going to get into that in just a few minutes. But right now, I want to introduce our special guest, and that is Pastor Jason Lee from Core Church LA. Pastor Jason, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad you are here. Let me give you a little background about Pastor Jason. He is, like I said, the pastor at Core Church LA. He's been serving in ministry for about 5 years and is currently leading the high school ministry. He does a phenomenal job. Hear a lot of good things about what he does there. He started up the young adults ministry before transitioning to the high school ministry. He also started the street evangelism ministry at Core as well. And if you know anything about Core Church, they're very, very strong when it comes to evangelizing. They do a phenomenal job with that. He has been married to his beautiful bride, Hannah, and they've been married for just over a year now. So how's it been in that first year, Jason?
It's been wonderful.
Very good. Well, gentlemen and listening audience, right now we're going to hold off on the phone calls because, and we're probably going to take them after the first hour, but we got some very, very important information to share with you. A little bit over, right about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, Professor Craig Hawkins spoke and taught down at Core Church LA. And it was on a very, very important topic. And the title of that teaching was called, Now That's Intolerant. And it's basically the issue dealing with Christians, non-Christians, tolerance, and intolerance. And the question is, are Christians tolerant or intolerant? And are non-Christians tolerant? And we dealt with a lot of this issue and what was going on in the world, and really finding out if non-Christians are intolerant as they say. So, gentlemen, you guys are kind of like the experts in this area, and you guys, it's interesting because Pastor Jason deals with it, dealing with high schoolers and people going into college, and then Craig deals with it, being a professor in college, seeing it from the other side of the road, so to speak. So let's get going on this topic, Craig, because I know this could be an entire semester worth of information. And what you shared with us at Core Church was very, very good. And I think that we need to expound on it and dig a little deeper. So, gentlemen, I want to start out the show by asking you this. For the Christian, Professor Hawkins and Pastor Jason. Why is this topic or issue so important? And I'm going to let you guys run with this one.
Jason?
On my side, I think what's so important about this issue is tolerance. Well, let's say the new tolerance, the current definition of tolerance has become the ultimate moral virtue in high school. And it's interesting because morality has been so blended these days that that people are just getting confused. And my high school students, they get confused or they get frustrated because they know the truth, and yet their whole school is kind of giving them something contrary. And so, out of respect and out of wanting to be accepted and respected and to have friends, they come up with against something that can be very difficult, which is the new tolerance is you have to believe and accept what we believe. And if you don't agree with this, then you're labeled as all these labels like hateful and bigoted and narrow-minded and backwards and stuff. So it's important for us as high school students and also in college students, because it could really confuse the Christian, and could really bring a lot of compromise and just a lot of conflict. So on my side, this is why this topic is so important.
Great.
Sure. Jason hit the nail on the head. There's a number of dynamics here, and we want to deal with as much as we possibly can tonight. If there's any virtue that it's seen today that would be absolute or ultimate is tolerance or inclusiveness, to include everybody, to exclude no one. And so among millennials and others, polls and whatnot, formally and informally have established this, that you're a hater or whatever term is in vogue if you're not tolerant of people. But as Jason pointed out, we need to deal with this. The definition of tolerance has changed. If you simply look up tolerance, for example, in Webster's or any standard dictionary, it basically means is that you tolerate, you put up with, you allow views that you disagree with. That's the standard, what we call a lexical definition of to tolerate. That you, again, it's something that you differ with, that you have a disagreement. It's sympathy. Literally, Webster says sympathy or indulgence for beliefs or practices differing from or conflicting with one's own. But today, and we've been told by various parties and groups that, we just want a place at the table. We just want to be accepted as equals. But that's not the case. They want to see their view as even being superior, and that you are intolerant if you don't embrace and celebrate their views. And so, again, the standard definition of tolerance, which is to put up with, to indulge, or to allow, if you will, views that differ from yours or conflict with your own, is not acceptable today. It's kind of like an absurd example, but it makes the point. If somebody wants to park themselves in a garage and call themselves a car, I'll let them do that, but don't ask me to call you a car. But they want us to call them a car, and then we're bigots and we're haters and we're intolerant if we don't. And so that's really the issue. And more specifically, again, we're seeing this in all these different realms, and I want to give a few specific examples. I think people are pretty well aware of this, but I like to always document the subject for what we're talking about. But specifically, it's seen that Christians, by definition, are intolerant, and everybody else is so tolerant. So what's called liberalism? Liberalism, now I'm speaking philosophically, politically. Liberalism classically in America, certainly at least in the Western world, has been defined as allowing autonomy, as much freedom, just for freedom's sake, not to necessarily pursue any good other than what the person thinks is good, but to indulge oneself, whether it's pleasure or hedonism or what have you, that the ultimate good is freedom. And so to do whatever you want. So allegedly incorporating the no harm principle that goes back to Bentham and John Stuart Mill, and you see it in law as well. The idea is if I'm not harming you, in quotes, and we'll come back to that, then I should be able to do whatever I want. And so Christians are seen as having a morality and a worldview centered in Jesus Christ that differs from that, and so we're by definition bigoted and obscurantist and intolerant.
So
it's said.
So, how long, gentlemen? How long has this transformation been taking place? I mean, 5 years, 10 years? How long has it been? Pastor Jason, Craig, any of you guys?
Well, I think I went to a very liberal college, and I wasn't a Christian back then, but I did start hearing this talk of tolerance and open-mindedness and inclusivity. I didn't hear that much in high school, and so I graduated college in 2010. So in terms of just thinking about this, I did hear a bit of that during my time in college, but not as much in high school.
Interestingly, liberalism itself has been around about 100-plus years, and there's various essays on this, whole books on liberalism. But this movement has definitely been strong the last 30-some-odd years. Last 10 to 20 has really come on strong. As a colleague of mine said, I graduated a little bit earlier than Jason did. We won't go there with my bachelor's at least. But what I heard was basically, you're a Christian, well, you just need to deal with it. You're going to hear all kinds of things that you disagree with and suck it up and build character. Too bad. This is a free marketplace of ideas. This is a university where we prize, we value free speech. You think of UC Berkeley in the 60s, and free speech, hey man, anything goes, so deal with it. As one of my friends says, one of my colleagues says, he says, when I went to college, they thought there was truth. They just thought I didn't have it. Now they think you're wrong if you think there is such a thing as truth. And by truth, I mean universal and exclusive, universal, that there are something that is literally true for all times, people, places, circumstances. Today, they find that laughable. And, of course, we have to have these safe places now. People don't want to be harmed. They don't want to hear ideas that are foreign to them, that are controversial to them, that upset them, and they shouldn't be exposed to this at college. And it's just incredible to me the total flip that's gone on the last 30, 40 years at many university campuses. And so, Jason's clearly seeing this with high schoolers. We see this with college students. I see it with older people. We're seeing it in almost every arena. Take the law, for example. I won't give all the actual specific cases. I did a lot of this when I spoke previously at Core Church on the 11th, Thursday night. And people, I believe, can watch that, Brian, if that's correct. So
yes, they can.
If they want some of the specific cases, I listed a number of them, but I'm just going to give the examples in brief. So there's cases of florists, of photographers, of bakers, who just simply said, it would be against my values to make a cake for a same-sex wedding. They didn't insult same-sex couples. They didn't offer their opinion. They just said that basically doing something for a wedding, that would be contradictory to their views, and they didn't want to be forced to do that. And they've actually been compelled by various state courts and the law to do it, or fined and or go out of business. One individual was fined $135,000, forced him out of business. Another individual in Colorado, they're trying to force him to do it as well, and demanding that he and his whole staff, including his 87-year-old grandmother, take sensitivity training and whatnot. How dare they disagree? How dare they offend these same-sex couples by exercising a right to, they would argue, a right not to do something that violates their conscience. And let me just say this. Here's the point, that the law is being brought to bear on various individuals. And they're saying, as a business person, you have no right not to serve certain people. And the law will compel you to do that, or you need to go out of business. And so think of this. Imagine, and this isn't something that's absurd or whatever. Imagine a radical racist, somebody from the KKK, coming to, say, a black couple that owns a bakery, or a Jewish couple or Jewish owners, and saying, we want you to make a cake that has on it a picture and or writing that is, anti-Semitic, for example, in the face, if you will, of what our Jewish friends believe, or of, let's say, a black couple or an Asian couple, whatever. And can you imagine them being compelled to do it? I mean, well, let's put it a little differently. Could you imagine a homosexual lesbian couple, transgender, or business owners being forced to make a cake that said something that was antithetical to what they believe? That's not going to happen. The courts are not going to support that. And so this is what's going on. One more example, and there's many cases from the law. They've already gone to the state Supreme Courts and whatnot, Colorado, Oregon, and otherwise, and people have lost. This isn't hypothetical. It's already here. Like the laws in Canada, where you're not allowed to publicly disagree with your clergy with same-sex marriage. Another example was Hillary Clinton in 2015 was speaking at a women's conference, World Women's Conference. And she basically said, I have the quote if you want it verbatim, but that basically the law needs to be brought to bear against religious people who don't believe in abortion, that they must be compelled. They need to change their views. She doesn't say, okay, it's a controversial issue, abortion. Some people agree, some don't agree, but we're going to live and let live. We hold it, it's okay. We believe in it. We want to support it. No, she believes those who disagree with her must be compelled to toe the line and support abortion, or at least not speak out against it, or if you're a company owner, have your company pay for abortions or what have you. And so they see this as the ultimate human rights issue, and that the law can and should compel those who disagree to toe the line and to act in accordance not with their own convictions and often their own religious views. In fact, they're just the opposite. But in spite of that, they should be compelled to hold to these liberal views that historic Orthodox Christians would disagree with, and not just Christians, others as well.
Interesting stuff. And if you want to listen and hear what Professor Hawkins said back on May 11th, you can go to the website. You can go to Core Church LA, corechurchla.org, and click on the link that says Sermons. And when you open it up, there's a box that says Latest Messages, and just go to May 11th, and you'll be able to hear Professor Hawkins, what he taught there back on May 11th. And we're going to have it on our website. Probably it'll be up this week. Here's a question I have, Pastor Jason. We know social media is just huge, okay? And social media could be done just for some really, really good things, but it can also be used for some really, really perverse things. Mm-hmm. Would you say, or would you comment on the issue of the topic we're talking about, being intolerant, and does social media have an effect regarding that with the kids or just in general?
Absolutely. One of the biggest ones, probably the hashtag movement, Black Lives Matter. And just, all these celebrities, all these very famous people, and maybe not even celebrities, but YouTube famous people or Instagram famous people, and all these things, they tend to have this same mentality of this quote-unquote new tolerance. And these students, it's the way that they describe it. It's very emotional, emotionally charged, beautiful pictures, and all these things that just look so beautiful. It looks so right, that it can definitely be a stumbling block for students who maybe care about people that are affected about it, whether they have friends who claim to have same-sex attraction, or those students who have been victims of racism and prejudices and all this stuff. It's so emotionally charged that sometimes we forget to think. And I think one thing that's a tragedy when it comes to new tolerance is, as Professor Craig says, the traditional value of tolerance is allowing a platform for people to respectfully disagree with one another and hear from one another why they have a stance that is contradictory or just different from them. And so they can think, they can talk it out and all that stuff. And so this new tolerism, which is you have to believe what we believe or you cannot be one of us, takes away from thinking. It takes away from critical thinking. It takes away from all this stuff. And what's left is this emotionally charged environment. And I think because of that, social media does play a huge role in distracting students from really thinking critically and just kind of being guided through their emotions. So absolutely, social media can be one of those things that can...
Sure.
Yeah.
Jason's point is well taken. And so what's happening is discussion that traditionally has been, for example, on the university campus, just, of course, social media and elsewhere, but the universities and colleges, which have allegedly been the main place for this type of dialogue and exchange of ideas in a civil manner, it's not being tolerated today. It's that those people are seen as haters, and basically, because they disagree with the mainstream liberal views, they're basically being told you shouldn't have First Amendment rights. They're violating the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. And the irony was, what do you think the First Amendment was given for? It was given for speech that people do find offensive. Mm-hmm. So other than inciting violence directly, and that's what they're trying to claim, and clearly times that's not the case, yelling fire in a crowded theater, the First Amendment is given for what speech that others consider offensive. You don't have to have a First Amendment right if everybody agrees with you. It's the speech you don't agree with. And as I often say, I will champion people's right to disagree with me, but also that gives me the right, I would argue as well, to disagree with them respectfully and civilly. So we need to say this. We're not trying to foment a mean-spiritedness or any type of hostility or violence against any group. But the irony is some of these groups are doing just that against those they disagree with. And we'll give chapter and verse examples of that. But the point is, for right now, is that what we want to convey, I want to get across here, is that so they're not even allowing people who disagree with them to even have a say. A gentleman, a fellow at the Stanford Institute, what have you, Shelby Steele, has written on this, the exhaustion of liberalism, and he comments about this, that liberals really have been had egg on their face because of the many, and indeed unethical, immoral, racist practices of America and Americans. And today they believe they have the high ground, and in a nutshell, what they're doing is anybody who disagrees with them, they just consider a Neanderthal, someone who's medieval from the Dark Ages, and that these people need to be shouted down. They're so outrageous, in quotes, that these conservatives shouldn't even be allowed the place at the table. They don't get a place, at the marketplace of ideas to share those. They shouldn't even be allowed to speak. And so, exactly as Jason said, they're not encouraging dialogue and back and forth civil discourse. It becomes a shouting match or shouting down people or threatening them or committing violence against them so they can't even speak. Another example here, another kind of a big area this is going on, and there's some incredible irony here. Indeed, I'm going to give some examples of the irony of this. SB 1172, which was passed, I believe, in 2013 in California, and then it got held up in the courts because Pacific Justice Institute brought a lawsuit against it, basically saying that professional counselors and whatnot cannot, and I believe it's, and quote, under no circumstances shall a mental health provider engage in sexual orientation change efforts with a patient under 18 years of age, regardless of the willingness of a patient's parent, guardian, conservator, or other person to authorize such efforts, end quote. That's a verbatim quote. Now let me show the irony of this. So what they're saying is that some person who maybe thinks they have same-sex attraction, they're not even sure, but maybe they're working through this, and of course younger people working through all kinds of issues trying to find themselves. And so even if they say, well, I want to hear the other side, a counselor, if they're under 18, is forbidden to talk to them about not, say, for example, not having the same-sex attraction, what's sometimes referred to as reparative therapy, by people like Dr. Joseph Nicolosi and others who work in this area. And here's the irony of this. So even one's parent is not supposed to tell them this. And they say because it's a biological issue. But the irony is that the current theory and ideas today is that gender and sexuality is socially constructed. That's just a fancy way of saying it's a choice. It's as an individual or collectively, we choose this. There is no biological determination. You can be born with all the plumbing of a male or female, and if you choose to be the opposite gender, they'd say, hey, that's your decision. Why? Because it's socially constructed. So let me just hit the nail on the head here, get this one out so people can hear us clearly. So part of the reasoning of this SB 1172, which actually just lost in the courts and finally this last month or two, and now will be fully implemented in California. The irony is again, we're told it's not biological, but this thing says it is biologically determined, and yet the theory, if you read people like Judith Butler, Julia Kristeva, others who write in these areas and teach in this area, and the whole theory is it's a social construct. Let me just explain that a little further and give an example of that. So social construction is a form of a social contract, and it's that reality is not universal or absolute. It's fluid. It's transient. It's amorphous. It is whatever you say it is. So, example, in America we drive typically on the right side of the road. In Great Britain they drive on the left side, and in India they drive wherever they want. We stop generally on red lights unless an officer commands you to go through it for some reason, and go on green light unless, again, for an ambulance or a police officer tells you not to, right? But of course, this could be reversed. We could go on red and stop on green. We could have purple with pink polka dots. I mean, these are just things we've agreed upon socially. We've constructed them. Look at articles of incorporation of just that, a company or the Constitution. It can be changed. It's not absolute. There's a procedure to change it, or even the Bill of Rights, which was added after the fact. So it's a construct. So it's sexuality or gender is a construct. And they say it's not binary. It can be anything. It can be it's a spectrum. There could not even be three sexes, but an infinite number. You could be Monday, Wednesday, Friday male, Tuesday, Thursday female, and who knows what in the other days. And I'm not being facetious. In fact, Oregon is actually implementing a law on driver's license. Now you can ask for this third sex or otherwise. It's actually going through. So social construction is the big buzzword or phrase, I should say. It has been for 10, 20 years plus now, with postmodernism and a bunch of other stuff. So the irony is that even this SB 1172, which is now a law in California, contradicts this, which says that everything is just a social construct. So here's the point: if that person under 18 says, hey, I really don't think I am, transgender, or I don't think I really want to have a same-sex attraction, a counselor is not allowed to counsel them in that area, even if they specifically ask for it on their own. Talk about an irony. Talk about hypocrisy. There's just a blatant example of many that we could talk about tonight.
Wow, it's I'm telling you, it's an eye opener, and I think Christians really need to wake up about what's going on. Pastor Jason, now, with some of the high schoolers you have, no names obviously, but what are some of the things they're coming up to you with dealing with this issue?
It's a mixed bag. I'll start with the good stuff. I have this one student in mind. She is incredible. I've just seen her grow so much, and there's some tough stuff going on in her life right now, and I think through that she's really clinged more to Christ and her dependency on Him and His grace, and with that follows this renewed love for the Lord, and from that love from the Lord, she has this renewed love for people in her class, and there's this one incident where she was put in a spot where her friends expected her to lie for her, and she didn't. She told the truth, and to make the long story short, her best friends came to her and said, "We can no longer be friends because you're such a Christian, whatever that means. You're such a Christian that that you actually are not that loving, because you should have lied for us. You should have gotten our backs, but you didn't." And so, for a couple of seasons, she didn't have anyone during lunchtime, during nutrition. And I've got plenty of students like that, where they're beginning to see that the Lord is more important than friends, and it's hard. It's really difficult, And then there are other students who struggle, where they say, okay, I love the Lord, yet I don't want to eat alone anymore, or I still love my friends, and they go through this, and they get into these really weird, awkward conversations about their faith, and sometimes, their friends who are not Christians will just kind of, let's just talk about something else, or they just change the subject, or kind of have that awkward silence, So there's a lot going on, and especially, I have this one student too, where I forget if it was about same-sex marriage or something like that, and he stuck to the truth. He stood his ground, and the teacher in front of the whole class berated him and said, young man, you are very narrow-minded. You need to snap out of it, essentially. Like, stop believing this, because you're so narrow-minded, and no one will like you anymore. And this is a teacher saying that in front of the whole class.
Wow.
And I think it's, I wish I knew exactly the whole context of it, and maybe it'll come back to me as we keep on talking. But this is what's happening in our classrooms. This is what's happening in high school, in junior high, and especially on the college campus.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Now, Craig, have you heard instances in the workplace with adults?
Oh, of course. And Jason's instance there can be multiplied by the hundreds, if not thousands. And absolutely, at workplace as well, sure. Because of this view that many people deny there's an ultimate truth, and because of relativism and postmodernism, some other worldview ideas, whether from the academic level or just John and Joan Q. Public or blue-collar worker at the workplace, there is social pressure often brought to bear on anybody who would dare disagree with the party line. And talking with friends and colleagues, a couple things here. It seems we've kind of argued, with postmodernism being so extreme, what's next? And I won't get into postmodernism right now, but a lot of us are in agreement, and we see this as it's the new universalism, and that is the civil religion, which is that as long as you worship Caesar, you can do whatever you want, but you got to worship Caesar. And so we're told we've got to bow the knee and worship at the altar of so-called tolerance, and that all views are true. I mean, basically they want you to say, I prefer mine, I like mine. It'd be like, I prefer banana cream pie, and you like cobbler, you like peach, or you don't like pie at all. But they want to say it's simply a matter of preference and not a matter of truth. So, of course, if that was true, well, how dare you try to legislate to everybody else that they have to like what you do? But we're arguing it is more than a preference. But the irony is, if theirs is just a preference, why are they trying to force us to accept theirs? Now, and we want to be clear, because I know Jason's saying this, and so am I, that we believe we should be loving and supportive of people. Part of the problem here is a false definition of love. This is some type of maudlin, overly emotionalized, wishy-washy view. Love, indeed, you can love your children and still discipline them. You can love somebody and say, I disagree with you. If you, for example, continue this financial investment, you may lose all your money. I may be a medical doctor and tell you, you have a terminal disease. I mean, I'm not trying to ruin your day, but I got to tell you, you need, let's say, open heart surgery, stat, and this is the only way to save your life. That's not being intolerant if it's true. You're simply giving them sound advice. So I want to put a couple of things on the table here, Brian, because there's so much to cover. I mentioned a quote by S.D. Gaede, Gaede, He wrote a book called When Tolerance is No Virtue. When Tolerance is No Virtue. And he has a pretty profound quote, and then he quotes G.K. Chesterton. And I want to just share this briefly. I think it's well worth it. And then I want to give a quote from Stanley Fish. Stanley Fish is a well-known intellectual in the area of law and literature, postmodernism. If anybody's taken many English classes and or literature or law, they will have come across Stanley Fish. Famous for books like There's No Such Thing as Free Speech and It's a Good Thing Too, and Liberalism Doesn't Exist, essays and books of those titles. I want to give a quote from him as well, but listen to this. Gady says from page 27 of his book, again, When Tolerance is No Virtue, he says, why do we who live in the modern world think tolerance is valuable in and of itself, even though it's impossible to live with consistently? The answer is that tolerance is a value that conforms nicely to the world we live in. Having pretty much decided that truth is not attainable, we have made tolerance of a plurality of truths a virtue. Having no truths worth defending, we have made non-defensiveness a mark of distinction. G.K. Chesterton once observed, try to get the quote here, that tolerance is a virtue of the man without convictions. And that seems pretty much to describe modern man and woman fairly accurately. So in other words, people who have no ultimate convictions, and even then I think they actually do have convictions. So we're just told, well, then, since there is no ultimate truth, or it's not available to us, either one of those very popular ideas with what's called epistemological moral relativism today, then we make tolerance a virtue. This reminds me, this is actually true, this has actually happened. Students have heard this one. Try this one out, guys. Students will come into class, and they're told, since there is no ultimate truth, we all ought to be tolerant of each other and open to everybody else's views. But actually, it doesn't follow at all. In fact, I actually know somebody who got up and walked out of a class, and the professor said, where are you going? He said, well, you've told me that the truth is not attainable, that everything is relative, so anything you have to say is just simply your opinion. Why should I stop and listen to your opinion? Why should I pay you money to do that? So if really all anybody's expressing is their personal preference, their story, well, if you want to tell me your story, great, but there's no compelling reason for me to listen or take it seriously. Now, again, we're not saying we ought to be insensitive and mean to people, but we do believe we have, speaking the truth in love, as Paul tells us, we have a duty, not just a right, to really tell people what the truth is. Not to be insensitive, not just to thrash people, not just to, dump on them in the name of truth and not try to, be considerate of where they're coming from, but still having the right to disagree with them. I want to give this Fish quote here. I just got to get the book in my hands. Sorry, guys, it's kind of hard to walk and chew gum here. Again, Stanley Fish, you can look him up on the internet, folks, if you've never heard of him. This isn't some obscurantus or obscure figure in modern thought and postmodernism and literature. This is a major player, one of the apostles, certainly in the Western world, of, again, what's called postmodernism and whatnot. Listen to what he says. This is from an essay that he's written, and he said it's entitled, again, Liberalism Doesn't Exist. Liberalism Doesn't Exist. I wish I could read all of it, but we don't have the time or the patience for that. But he basically talks about free speech being a political prize, and he says, at one point very explicitly, when he and others like him obtain the ascendancy, when they have the critical mass, they're not going to give free speech to those they disagree with. This is incredibly eye-opening. I mean, I want to thank him for his candor, his honesty. Most liberals are not willing to say that, but he says, look, and I'll give you the quote in just a minute, we're as dogmatic as any fundamentalist, conservative, and we're not going to give free speech to those we disagree with. And the irony is, as I mentioned earlier, liberalism is defined as freedom, and that would include freedom of speech, expression, and so on and so forth. But listen to this quote. You see that I'm not just putting words in his mouth. He says, and I quote, tolerance may be what liberalism claims for itself in contradistinction to other, supposedly more authoritarian views. But liberalism is tolerant only within, this, and that's italicized, by the way, the space demarcated by the operations of reason. Anyone who steps outside of that space will not be tolerated and will not be regarded as a fully franchised participant in the marketplace of ideas. over which reason presides. And so he goes on to say, listen to this, in this, liberalism does not differ from fundamentalism or from any other system of thought. For any ideology, and an ideology is what liberalism is, must be founded on some basic conception of what the world is like. And he goes on, so on and so forth. So the point is, he admits that liberalism, which he claims to be a champion of, and in one sense doesn't really exist, but ironically is not going to give free speech to those they disagree with, and is just as dogmatic as any basically conservative fundamentalist. This really tells you what's going on, and this is the bottom line. I mean, this is just a moment of incredible candor, and I share this with my students. I make them read this, and when I teach jurisprudence, because it's actually in a jurisprudence reader, originally published in another work, and so I think it really tells you what's going on.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Professor. You know, ladies and gentlemen, I want to take a quick break right now to let you know that the Bible Information Brokers, on behalf of Living by the Word Ministries, it is a faith-supported broadcast, and that means our broadcast is completely dependent on the financial support of our listeners. So if you believe in the work of this ministry, if you believe that this ministry is having a positive spiritual impact on you, then we're asking you to stand with us and help support this radio broadcast, not just with your prayers, and we thank you for your prayers, but also with your financial giving. Here's the bottom line. You know, whenever you spend money, there's a reason why you're investing your money in whatever that is you're spending it on. So ask yourself, really, if this broadcast is worth making a financial investment in, and which I also believe is a spiritual investment as well. And if it is, we'd like you to take the time and send this ministry a donation today. And remember, when you give, it is a tax deduction, as you well may know. So with that being said, here's a couple ways that you can give. The first way is quick, it's easy, and that's through the internet. You can go to our website, that's BibleInfoBrokers.com, BibleInfoBrokers.com, and just simply click on the link that says support and donate. Real simple. It's right there. It says support and donate, and you'll have the option of making a one-time donation, or you can set up automatic monthly deductions, and we have a few people that do that. It just makes it easy, and I don't have to worry about it, and that deduction's automatically done every month. Or like I said, you can just make a manual deduction. The second way is by mailing in your check or money order too. Now, we've been giving you a P.O. Box number for close to 20 years. Well, we have a new P.O. Box, okay? So write this down, okay? That P.O. Box is 90477. That's P.O. Box 90477, Los Angeles, California, 9009. Once again, that's P.O. Box 90477, Los Angeles, California, 9009. So whether your donation is by mail, if it's by the internet, we want to definitely thank you in advance for supporting the Bible Information Brokers broadcast. So with that being said, I got another question for you, gentlemen. And you know what? If to our listening audience, if you have any kids, or if you are experiencing any of this this quote unquote non-tolerance or tolerance, give us a call. The toll-free number is 1-888-LA-TALKS, 1-888-528-2557. Or if you have a comment, we normally don't take comments. Or if you have a question regarding this topic, start dialing right now, 1-888-LA-TALKS, 1-888-528-2557. And, I was saying, if you're a parent and you have kids and you notice that they're experiencing or going through some of that, I'd like to hear from you, 1-888-LA-TALKS, 1-888-528-2557. And that kind of brings me to the question of, as Christians, okay, how do we respond? Here's the thing: you're gonna get, hey, Craig, Jason, we're not harming anybody. We're not, bothering you, and we're not telling you this, we're not telling you that. Why are you getting on our case, or why are you saying something, and we're not bothering you at all? How do you respond to that?
I feel like the silence is for me. Yeah,
well,
that's
you're our guest, so we give you first dibs.
Yeah, this is a really hard one because I do get this question a lot. That we can give all these great examples of like, if a pedophile says, "Hey, this is my truth," I find love and meaning of life in this kind of my attraction to this kind of population. And so you have to tolerate that. I think a lot of skeptics would say, well, that's because well, of course this is not okay because they're harming little kids, and all that stuff. So, but then they'll go on and say, but I have a lot of friends who are same-sex attracted, who are amazing people. I have family members who I love and are not bad people. And this is how they find happiness. This is how they find, this is the life that God has given them. So let's give them a break. And first and foremost, this is a conversation that you cannot have in in an hour. This is an ongoing conversation that should happen. And as Professor Craig says, we have to come in with love, but at the same time, love with a backbone.
Good point. Very good point.
And we come with meekness, and what that means is power under self-control. And I think what it is we as Christians understand that sin is pleasurable for a moment. If sin was not pleasurable, then no one would sin. But there's something about sin that's very pleasurable for us. And for the Christian, we understand that we have a light, momentary life here, and then comes eternity, with or without God. And the urgency that we Christians have is that our life and our purpose is not rested on the life that we have here on earth, but eternity. And that motivates us to say, hey, look, yes, okay, sure, I can grant you that these people who aren't, quote unquote, hurting anyone is having a happy life. I can grant that, But we believe as Christians that God has created us for eternity. And with that, he longs for a relationship. He longs for us to have this understanding that we need forgiveness because we have rebelled against God, and the life that we have here is nowhere close. No matter how pleasurable life is, no matter how happy life is here, is nowhere in comparison to the life that we can have with Christ here on earth and also in eternity. That's why Jesus says, the thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy, but I came so that they may have life, and that they may have life abundantly. And I believe that Jesus says that here on earth and also in heaven. And so the conversation is like, look, yeah, they may be happy, but we have a God that can multiply that happiness more and more. And that's not to say some sort of health, wealth, prosperity kind of thing. It's just the truth. When we walk with the Lord, there, in Psalm 16, right? In your presence there is fullness of joy, and at your right hand there are pleasures forevermore. And I think that's how we are to kind of, that's how I would talk to people. Be like, look, I'm all about joy. I'm all about happiness. I'm all about pleasure. But if all we place are the pleasures in this world, we will always be dissatisfied, and the Lord promises something so much more to that. So that would be my first kind of beginning conversation. But I would always be like, hey, when's the next time I can take you out to In-N-Out, or whatever it is. I want to build a relationship with them. I want to have a good rapport with them before we get even deeper.
Awesome.
Right. And sometimes we have to earn, of course, the right to be heard, and it takes time to have these conversations. But a lot of things feel pleasurable. A lot of things seem like they make a person happy. Let's take someone who smokes. Now, I'm not necessarily saying I want to make cigarette smoking illegal, but it's clearly bad for you. And there are people who say, as a former smoker, years ago I understand this, I enjoy smoking, I derive satisfaction. And I would say, well, yeah, I understand that. But I also understand the odds of you getting lung cancer, lip cancer, emphysema, or worse are really high or staggering. So basically, what they're saying is, no matter what you say God says, and some will say I'm born this way. By the way, there's no biological studies that support that. There's no biological evidence for that. And even if one was born that way, that wouldn't necessarily make it right if we have evidence contrary. It'd be like saying someone's born without an eye or an arm. Well, I'm born that way. Hey, it must be okay. You know, we're not saying we would love them any less. That's not the point. But just because you're born some way doesn't make it right. That's the is-ought fallacy. That doesn't follow. And there's not even the evidence biologically to prove it anyway. But let me just go on to this point. So, again, it's like going to the doctor, and I tell the doctor, I feel fine, I feel great. And she says to me, well, you may feel fine now, but we've got these tests, and you've got this terminal disease. And down the road, if we don't take care of this now, ASAP, you're going to die very premature, die prematurely. You may feel fine, but what you're doing is really destructive to your health. And so you can't just go by feelings. And we want to, by definition, from the biblical view, we want to indulge ourselves, try to find happiness in things that will ultimately never make us happy. St. Augustine said it years ago. He died in 430, he said, A.D., that our hearts are restless until they find their rest in Thee, and that there's this God-shaped void in us, and we try to fill it with sex, drugs, rock and roll, or whatever we think is going to make us happy and bring fulfillment. And we're going to argue that God, who's not just the cosmic killjoy, who's not just the Mr. Rules and Regulations, but indeed, as Jason said, is come to give us life and that more abundantly, says, look, I made you. That's not going to make you happy. Doing this is ultimately going to harm you, harm your soul here and now, and for eternity. And so I want to make three distinctions that I think we should point out here. And again, I have many same-sex friends, and I have over the years. I don't thrash on them. But I do disagree as is appropriate when the time presents itself. But three distinctions that need to be made.
And Craig, we're coming up to the top of the hour, so we got about probably got 2.5 minutes. So I don't know if I don't think you'll be able to get all three in.
Well, I'm just going to mention them. We can come back to them.
Okay.
Tolerance of persons. We want to tolerate people, that is, love and accept them, even though we disagree with some of their behavior or ideas. But then tolerance of ideas and then tolerance of behavior. I would argue we should love people, even when we strongly disagree with them. But their ideas and then some of their behavior, I think we, again, not only have the right, but the duty at times to object. And perhaps we can, again, of course, Brian, continue that on the other side of the break.
Very, very good. Ladies and gentlemen, you listen to the Bible Information Broker as Pastor Jason Lee from Core Church LA is our guest this evening. We're dealing with the topic of tolerance, intolerance, Christians, non-Christians. Jerry, Maurice, Easy, we see you. Don't go anywhere. We're going to get to your calls because we want to hear what you have to say. We definitely want to hear back on the other side of the break as well from Pastor Jason and Craig. I want to know how Christians can be equipped to deal with this issue, okay? And because that's what's going to be asked of Christians. We talk about 1 Peter 3:15. Always be ready to give an answer. Well, that's something we definitely want to do, and so we're gonna talk about that. We do have a couple open lines. If there's anyone out there that want to comment on this topic that we're dealing with, it's a very, very important topic. I don't want to say it's coming. It's here, okay. And it's I don't want to say it's scary, but it's the real deal, and it's something that we as Christians are going to have to deal with. You can't run away from it because it's in our faces, and we need to know how to respond, how to answer questions that come about, and how to deal with these issues that again are being thrown in our face. So give us a couple minutes. We are going to be back right after these messages. Again, Easy, Maurice, Jerry, don't go away. The toll-free number, 1-888-LA-TALKS, 1-888-528-2557. Give us a call. We want to hear from you. If you have any kids that are going through this, we also want to hear from you as well. All right? We'll be back in just a few minutes.